All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this special meeting. I will call this meeting of the CC Power Board to order. And I'm going to ask General Counsel to verify the meeting quorum.
Thank you. I can verify that there is a quorum present.
Thank you. We'll now go to item 3, matters subsequent to posting the agenda, and we don't have any. So we'll move to item 4, which is public comment on any matter not on the agenda. Do we have public comment on any matters not on the agenda? Okay. I see one hand, Rafael Lai.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for having this meeting. My name is Rafael Lai. I'm the founder and executive director of Critical Impact Consulting. I am making a comment on specifically the environmental justice policy, and wanted to make sure that I was able to make that comment sufficiently. So before I begin, I have a background in environmental justice. I've been working in environmental justice for the past decade for several organizations. And as a community organizer, I saw CCAs as a concept paper and help do public outreach and awareness for CCAs across the Bay Area. And to see where CCAs are now and is quite incredible. So I think that's an accomplishment that we should all take some pride in. With that being said, though, I think the environmental policy language is just very insufficient. When you look at Assembly Bill 1628, Environmental Justice bill that was passed in California in September 2019, that provides a really great framework to be able to put policy language into CC Power. For now, there just is way too much insufficiencies for this policy to be able to pass through. I think if this were to pass through, there could be a lot of unintended harm and exclusion of environmental justice communities. And I don't think that is the direction or intention of this agency. I think 5 things I would like to point out is that, 1, there is a lack or no meaningful engagement of environmental justice stakeholders. In previous meetings, there have been no public comment or no presentations that clearly define or that clearly indicate a meaningful level of engagement. In AB 1628, Section 3, 65040, it says governmental entities engaging in providing technical assistance to populations and communities most impacted by pollution to promote their meaningful participation in all phases of environmental and land use decision-making. 2, no lack or no definition of environmental justice communities. We have Cal EnviroScreen in California, and that is a tool that agencies and the public can be able to use, and that is not present here in this policy. 3, there's no collaboration amongst existing California governmental agencies with EJ experience. Once again, that can be found in the Section 3, 65040, that says that the director shall consult with agencies such as the Environmental Protection, Secretary of Transportation, or Working Group in Environmental Justice. 4, no equity assessment or methods to evaluate equity. There's none of that at all. And then 5, I would recommend analyzing environmental justice case studies within CCA members to bring those policies up for the larger CC Power Board. So in my conclusion, I would really recommend that these policies are insufficient and unacceptable, quite frankly. It needs to be go back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Looking for other hands up on public comment on items not on the agenda. I see no more hands up. So we'll bring it back to the board and we'll move on to item 5. Item 5A is to consider and possibly approve resolution 21-10-01. I'm going to hand it over to our general counsel to describe this item for the board.
Yes, thank you. So This board has been meeting virtually in accordance with the governor's executive orders to help facilitate public meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic. The executive orders suspended some of the notice and public participation requirements for public agency meetings held through teleconference. Those executive orders expired on September 30th. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, are aware that the governor signed Assembly Bill 361, which continues the suspension of the teleconference notice requirements under specific circumstances. So in order to continue to meet virtually following the same practices that we have been following, there must be a formal declared state of emergency, and either there are state or local orders or recommendations promoting social distancing, or the board makes a determination by a majority vote that due to the state of emergency, meeting in person would present imminent risk to the health or safety of attendees. So this is the determination and resolution that's before the board today. The determination that meeting in person does present a risk to the health or safety of attendees. But I did want to note that this determination is required to be reconsidered and reconfirmed every 30 days in order to continue holding the virtual meetings under AB 361. So this is not a permanent change. These provisions are only in place until either 2024, according to legislation, or until the governor lifts the state of emergency, or as I mentioned, if the board determines that it's no longer a risk. So once that happens, once these provisions expire or it's no longer a risk to meet, the board may continue to meet virtually, but it will be subject to the original Brown Act notice requirements. And these are listed out in the memo included in the packet, but that would include noticing and posting agendas at every teleconference location. So every location that a board member is calling in from. It would include ensuring that each teleconference location is accessible to the public and ensuring that members of the public are given the opportunity to speak at each teleconference location. And lastly, I did want to mention that if the board does not make this determination today by approving the resolution, we would have to end this meeting and hold any further items until a later meeting to allow us to comply with the Brown Act notice requirements. And so I'm happy to take any questions from the board if there are any.
So let's have questions from the board before we go to public comment. Not seeing any raised hands here. Let me ask if the public has any comment on this item. I don't see any raised hands, so we'll bring it back to the board for discussion and possibly entertaining a motion. Jeff?
Sonoma, I would move the item.
Okay.
I'll second.
Sonoma moves, MCE seconds. Let's take it to a vote.
Okay, for resolution 21-1001, Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy, I believe is absent, Marin Clean Energy,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority,
Yes.
and Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
Okay, this resolution passes.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to item 5B, which is the subject of today's meeting. So this is going to be a bit of an all hands presentation. We're going to have several people making presentations over here. So I'll start, but basically kind of, I wanted to recognize the efforts that every member of this board and staff has undertaken over this last year, and maybe even longer than that. We started this process by coming together. I think it really reflects what CCAs do well, reflecting the needs of the community, collaborating, being agile and nimble. So we came together, I'd say like MCE started the process way back by putting an RFO out, and then we came together and we created CC Power earlier this year. In a remarkably short time, we are here at this point where we're starting the process of approval for our first contract. And over the last couple of years, so much has changed. It's not just reliability, but mandates that have been imposed on us to get to our clean energy future. And I just feel so great about being part of this group where we are collaborating so effectively and doing joint procurement. And hopefully this is not going to be our last. This will be the first of many kinds of joint procurements that we do as we realize our clean energy future. I wanted to thank Lori and Mitch for being sounding boards on the ad hoc committee to bring this forth. And with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Tim to say a few words. And he'll unmute himself. So.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to the board. One of the things that I've learned in my long career is that there's a time to be quiet and listen. And this just happens to be one of those times. I'm going to reserve my comments for later after the presentation has been made. As Girish had mentioned, there are many people who are responsible for where it is that we are today. And I think that it's important to just be able to bring them forward and to allow them to be able to walk you through how it is that we've gotten to this place, what it is that lies ahead in the review and approval process. And so what I want to do is just introduce you that Kevin Fox, who is lead attorney for the negotiating team, will be presenting. Tony Braun is going to guide us through some of the review and approval process. But I think it's a particular note that we bring in Monica Padilla. Monica is the Director of Power Resources with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. She's the architect of this program. She's been the glue that has held this together. And I'm just going to turn it over to Monica to walk us through the slides and just let her presentation speak for her capability and credibility. So with that, Monica, I'd like to turn it over to you and walk us through the slides, if you would, please.
And as the slides are coming up, I'll just note that East Bay Community Energy, Nick Chassett, has joined the meeting.
Okay, well, good morning, directors. I'm privileged to be here representing a very amazing group and talented staff from each of the CCAs. I was selected or asked to be the chair of what we call the Project Oversight Committee for our first project under CC Power, the long duration storage procurement effort. And so it hasn't been a super straightforward process. So we've learned a lot, but we're very excited to bring to you hopefully our first, and as Girish mentioned, not our last project coming through this effort. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So the objective of this presentation, as Tim mentioned, is to provide a background of the RFO process itself, how we got to the place that we are today with the project that we're bringing in front of you. And all of this is to support this notice of intent to execute an energy storage service agreement with Ellis Power for their Tumbleweed long duration energy storage project. Next slide. So as Girish mentioned, this all started back in June of 2020 when Marin Clean Energy, on behalf of, I believe, 13 CCAs, issued a request for information. And the purpose of that RFI was to understand, like, where is long duration storage in terms of commercial viability? Is there enough capacity to potentially meet the needs that the CPUC was indicating were necessary in order to meet the long-term carbon-free goals by 2045, 2030. When we were all going through the process of developing our IRPs, it became very obvious to us that LDS was going to have to be a component of our portfolios, but we didn't understand how much of it, or what it would cost, or when it could come online, or who can even provide this. And then more importantly, what is the technology that's out there? So the RFI was to inform us if it was necessary to issue an RFO or not. So we issued the RFI, we got tons of really good information. We used that information in our IRPs. I think the CPUC got quite excited about the information that we had gathered as well. And so we issued an RFO in October of 2020. We quickly put together a team. CC Power didn't exist at that time, but we had enough interest in the CCA community to work on this without a formal structure. So we formed an ad hoc committee to issue the RFO. We specifically sought to find a large amount of LDS storage. So we asked for up to 500 megawatts, not knowing exactly what our requirements were going to be again. And then, as Grace mentioned, CC Power officially formed in February while we were going through the RFO process. We spent probably about from December to May, June evaluating these projects, and I'll go through that process. It was quite involved. And then at that same time, the CPUC issued their procurement mandate with respect to the midterm reliability procurement order to replace Diablo Canyon power plant. And within that procurement order is a specific requirement for long duration storage, which I'll also talk about. And that brings us to where we are today, after going through, again, all the evaluations, working on some negotiations. We have in front of us an agreement that we think can make it to the finish line. And we'll talk about that as well. Next slide. This is just the timeline for the RFO that we've shared with the community, the developers, to give them a sense of what our process is. Next slide. So again, the objectives of the RFO, one of them was to inform our IRP and to see if we can actually procure around a potential mandate. But for us, more important was to find and procure cost-effective long-duration storage resources that would help each of us integrate renewables into the grid. So we really were looking for good projects, good cost-effective projects that would be durable over the long term. We also sought to do this in a joint way. And so doing joint procurement allows us to share resources, to evaluate, negotiate, ultimately bring these resources online, and to also share in project risk. Because many of us weren't certain about how well these types of resources could fit within our portfolio, it seemed to us to make more sense to share in that project risk and take small bites of it. We also were at this get-go technology and location agnostic. So we have CCAs representing, all of California. For this particular effort, they were mostly in the Northern California area, but we did not close off the location to any specific place. Our ideal and our objective was to find projects that made economic sense. We didn't set out to look for a particular type of technology, whether it be lithium ion or what we call emerging technology, so we left that open as well. And we were also open to the different types of products, whether it be resource adequacy only or full tolls, but we understood that much of the value would come if we had a full toll. We had some requirements in our solicitation. They had to be a Cal ISO resource or the ability to import with dynamic transfer rights. They had to be able to meet resource adequacy requirements. And this is a really complicated one because as we're going through this whole process, the rules kept changing and the indication by the CPUC on what the long-term resource adequacy structure would look like was also kind of in play. So we had to do a little bit of kind of scenario analysis around resource adequacy. And we still don't know what the value of these resources will be in resource adequacy because it's all subject to change. We required that they be at least 8 hours in terms of discharge duration. We didn't know what the CPUC was going to signal. And this was a hard one for us because we didn't want to go out and procure something that wouldn't meet a requirement later down the road. So we had a little bit of discussions with the CPUC on this as we were going through the RFO process to kind of get a sense of what they're requiring. So 8 hours is something that we assumed it would be kind of the minimum that they would seek. We also set a COD date of no later than June 2026. This is what we thought was going to be required by the CPUC as well to meet the Diablo Canyon power plant going offline. We had a minimum term of 10 years. We didn't set a maximum term, just kind of, we felt that it made more sense to do these over a longer term than say a 5-year product. We did set a minimum capacity of 50 megawatts. And the other requirement is that the developer submit or the seller submit a complete bid package. Next slide. So offers, we got tons of offers or lots of offers for projects starting as early as 2023. In total, we received 51 entities submitting over 9,000 megawatts of capacity. Of those 51 entities, many of them provided multiple offers. So we had 22 unique pricing offers. Included within that were 160 full tolls. And again, a full toll is where we get all the capacity value we get to schedule it for energy purposes as well. And then 57 RA only offers. So in this case, we would only get to count the capacity towards some kind of compliance requirement for resource adequacy. There were 8 different technology types, which you could see on the right-hand side of the slide, and 18 distinct technologies. Some of these I had never heard of, and I still have a hard time pronouncing them. So if you ask me details about them, I'm not your person, but I could certainly track it down for you. And then we had multiple discharge durations ranging from 8 to 12 hours, and a couple of multi-day projects as well. Next slide. So of those 98 primary offers, we had to, of the 221 offers, we had to narrow it down to what we called primary offers, and we identified 98. And those primary offers were based, first of all, they had to be conforming. They had to meet all the requirements that we identified in the RFO. And then we picked the lowest price ones of those unique offers. And then for the purpose of just being able to quickly do an evaluation, we had to also narrow it down because multiple offers or developers offered projects with multiple delivery terms. So we narrowed it down to just the ones that were 10 to 15 years. Next slide. So again, this is all in advance of having CC Power in place. So the group that sent out the RFO quickly pivoted and became an evaluation team. And we had a rubric in the RFO, and we stuck to that rubric, but we had to quickly figure out how we were going to evaluate all these projects. So we broke it up into 2 rounds. Round 1 was, and we can go to the next slide here. So round 1 was a fast pass of the evaluation for all the conforming offers. So first, and the little boxes on the bottom of the blue boxes, those indicate the CCAs that took the lead effort in this part of the evaluation process. So this truly was a team effort. Everybody pitched in. So for the expected value, we did a quick analysis of the NPV for all the projects. They were not project specific in terms of where they were located. We had it based on a kind of a locational area. And then we also evaluated these projects based on project risk, ability to meet RA requirements now and in the future. Because we had so many interesting and new types of technologies, we did an extensive assessment of the technology viability led by Marin and Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And then we spent quite a bit of time understanding the developer themselves, what their experience was with working with CCAs, the environmental conditions of where the project was going to be located, and then other elements of the offer that they had made, including changes to the term sheet that we included in our pro forma. So after round 1, we scored them all, ranked them, and then we took the top 17 projects to round 2. Next slide. So just out of those 17 projects, just to note, the top 10 projects that received the highest scores were all lithium-ion batteries. And we were super excited about all the emerging technology, and we were hearing that this was important for a lot of the CCAs to pursue emerging technology as well. So we decided to leave a spot for also emerging technologies. So we took, of the 17 that we had identified, we allocated 7 spots to emerging technologies, so non-lithium ions. Next slide. And so those went through round 2 of the evaluation process, which was a much more in-depth evaluation process. We retained the services of Gridwell Consulting, Carrie Bentley and her team, and Ascend Analytics to do much of this assessment, along with the team, the CCA teams that you see again in the little white boxes there. The biggest part of this analysis really was around the NPV of these projects. And so Ascend has a sophisticated model that can do a whole bunch of kind of stochastic analysis around the expected value of these projects under multiple scenarios and multiple market price and weather conditions. They have a fundamental model that talks about how solar and storage is going to get deployed throughout the state or throughout the CalISO grid. And so they take their model and they come up with a range of value there. As I mentioned before, we also did an assessment based on different resource adequacy value because we didn't know what the RA value was going to be. So we separated the energy value from the RA value so that we can look at them distinctly and then value, what is this thing really worth from an energy standpoint, and then how much can it vary from a resource adequacy value standpoint. We also had a lot of discussions about how we would operate these resources if we were to bring them into our portfolio. Would we bid them into the day ahead market? Would we try to get all the value we could in the real-time market, or something in between? So we ran scenarios around that as well. Carrie and her team did a locational and interconnection risk, working with the CalISO directly. They went and looked at the specific project to see what kind of interconnection capacity constraints there were at the location and what kind of interconnection risk. Because again, our ideal is to have these projects come in as soon as possible and make sure that they're viable from an interconnection standpoint too. And then Peninsula led the effort to evaluate for these 17 projects the labor aspects of their offer, and looked at the same time. Here we're now, CC Power has now been formed, and there's been some discussion about policy requirements and how we would evaluate certain elements of labor and environmental justice and environmental conditions in our evaluation. So PCE took the lead on that. And then for all the projects that were emerging technologies in this round, which were 7, we had one-on-one interviews with the developers to better understand the technology, the risk, the viability, and the likelihood of being able to move this forward. Next slide. This is an illustration of Ascend's model that was used to calculate net present value. Next slide. So project value, just a few things to note here is when we did the assessment, for the most part, costs for the storage resources were assumed to be fixed. We did have a couple of projects that had a variable operating component to it that where the more we discharged or cycled the battery, the higher the cost got. So we had to incorporate that in our analysis as well. So again, one of our objectives from the very get-go was to find cost-effective resources. That was really important to us, to find the best and to hopefully find ones that added value to our portfolios. After doing the long evaluation and doing all these scenarios, our conclusion was that for these best projects that we selected, the cost effectiveness or the NPV ranged anywhere from slightly negative to marginally positive, and very much dependent on a lot of conditions on whether they were positive or not, including resource adequacy and how it would be treated. We learned a few things through this process, which some of us already knew and it was intuitive, that location really does matter. Where you site these batteries today and what's going to happen to that location in the future will very much determine the value of this battery over its life. And then how you operate the battery is also going to be very important, whether you use it for resource adequacy and bid it all into day ahead to follow load, or you're using it in real time to try to extract the most value. It's going to change your your expected value and the risk as well. And that ancillary services for these resources is expected to decrease over time. And that's just a function of more batteries coming onto the grid, less and less AS opportunity. And then again, as I mentioned, resource adequacy value, and that is, what we wouldn't have to buy on the market to meet our compliance requirements is very dependent on whatever regulatory structure the Cal ISO and the CPUC put in place. Next slide. So this brings us to shortlisting. And this is where the Project Oversight Committee, basically their part of the process ends. After we did this evaluation, we had to pick projects that made sense from a size standpoint. At this point, we now know what our requirement is from the CPUC under the midterm reliability procurement order. It's much lower than we had originally anticipated. And so we have to narrow down the 17 to a manageable size that we can shortlist and then move on to negotiations. So we made our recommendation, but ultimately the interim general manager finalized the shortlist and then handed it over to the negotiating team. And this is where I hand it over to Kevin to pick up on the negotiation team, which by the way was Kevin Fox, who's presenting, and Carrie Bentley as a lead negotiator. Next slide.
Thank you, Monica. First, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to assist with this effort. The first slide that you see here simply lists the various agreements that were used during the RFO and the negotiating process. The next slide, if you would please, is important to understanding how the agreements on the prior slide fit into an overall contracting structure that was used for the RDS RFO. And there are four key ingredients, I should have said agreements, but they are, I guess, to some extent ingredients as well, to the overall contracting structure here. And each of these four agreements is represented by a box that you see on this slide. The top box on this slide should be labeled as the coordinated operating agreement, and apologies that title got left off. The other four agreements on this slide are the Energy Storage Services Agreement, the Project Participation Share Agreement, and the Buyer Liability Pass-Through Agreements. Now, typically, a CCA will enter into an Energy Storage Service Agreement, the middle left box on this slide, with a developer to procure energy storage services for the CCA's customers. And that ESSA addresses issues such as payment obligations, liability for damages, and operational control of the storage unit. And so if this was just a single CCA contracting with a developer for energy storage services, all you would see is just the middle left box, the Energy Storage Services Agreement. The additional boxes here representing the three additional agreements are all incident to the joint procurement nature of this LDS RFO. Substituting CC Power into the procurement role in the place of the CCA raises several categories of questions, like how will CC Power obtain revenue to make ESSA payments, which CCAs are supporting CC Power's obligations, and how will CC Power dispatch the storage facility in the Cal ISO market. The Coordinated Operating Agreement, Project Participation Share Agreement, and Buyer Liability Pass-Through Agreements address and are an attempt to resolve those questions. The Project Participation Share Agreement, which is the middle right box, addresses CC Power's source of revenue to make payments under the ESSA. The PPSA, that middle right box, also addresses additional important issues such as how CCAs will share revenue from CC Power's sales of energy and ancillary services into the Cal ISO market. The PPSA also addresses how the CCAs will direct CC Power's actions under the ESSA. And the PPSA also includes step-up requirements that would require participating CCAs to step in and cover a member default in order to avoid a CC Power default under the ESSA. Buyer liability pass-through agreements, the bottom box on this slide, provides further support to developers for CC Power's ability to perform under the ESSA. The buyer liability pass-through agreements do this by requiring each of the CCAs that are participating in the project to guarantee CC Power's payment obligations, and each of the CCAs will do so in proportion to each CCA's share of the project. The intention with respect to this part of the overall contract structure was to try to mirror as closely as possible the liabilities and obligations that each of the participating CCAs would have if they were contracting with a developer directly for the energy storage services. The Coordinated Operations Agreement, which again is the top box on this slide, addresses how CC Power will dispatch the storage facility in the Cal ISO market. The Coordinated Operations Agreement will be jointly entered by CC Power and each of the participating CCAs, and will authorize the retention of a scheduling coordinator and establish a decision-making structure to direct the scheduling coordinator to dispatch the storage facility in the Cal ISO market. Putting all of these pieces together leads to the overall contracting structure that was deployed in all of the negotiations that came out of the LDS RFO shortlisting process that Monica just spoke to. And with that, Monica, I'm going to turn things back over to you.
Okay, next slide. So at this point, we're now at the stage where negotiations are continuing. We have a clear kind of understanding of the contracting structure, and we have a clear understanding of which resources of the ones that we've shortlisted could help us to get to our pathway to meet our compliance requirements and or provide valuable resources to our portfolio. So here we've identified that 7 of the CCAs that had been working on this effort wanted to move forward. And this was a kind of a critical milestone in the process. And so right now, the ones that are participating include Silicon Valley, Clean Power SF, San Jose Clean Energy, Peninsula Clean Energy, Valley Clean Energy, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and Sonoma Clean Power. Next slide. So as we mentioned in June, the CPUC adopted the midterm reliability procurement order, or the MTR decision. And several things came out of that, including an identification of a need for 11.5 gigawatts or 11,500 megawatts of new resources to be procured and online by 2026. Included in that decision was the several parameters around what had to be included in new procurement. And so contracts had to be at least 10 years. And the allocation to load serving entities was determined to be based on a load share ratio. So there was a lot of discussion on how that was going to play out. This is what we got. They also identified that all resources had to be zero emission or RPS eligible, obviously with the exception of storage. And then 4,500 megawatts of obligation were subject to specific category requirements. Go to the next slide because it says next slide there. Next slide. So you've probably all seen these tables. Your directors, your staff has probably brought these to you to show you what the procurement requirements are under the procurement order. But the one I'll highlight is the tranche that's called long duration storage resources. There's a little red box around it. So for the whole system, the requirement is 1,000 megawatts by 2026. And then if you go to the next slide, there was also this requirement that of the nameplate capacity of that 1,000 megawatts, that different duration batteries would receive different effective load carrying capacity factors, so ELCCs. Recently, a study was released by the CPUC. It's a preliminary study that identifies what the ELCCs will be for each of the different types of discharge duration for batteries. It's not clear exactly how to interpret this table, so we're hoping to have a discussion with the CPUC soon to better understand how to interpret this table. But one could interpret it as being for long duration storage with an 8-hour discharge. If a project came online in 2024, we'd be able to count 94.3% of the nameplate capacity. Whereas if the project came out in came online in 2026, we'd only be able to count 78.2%. These numbers are preliminary. The CPUC has indicated that by December 2022, they will have the final numbers, but we need to make a decision today. So a little bit of this is guessing as far as what our actual requirements are. And if you go to the next slide. So for those CCAs that are participating, the 7 CCAs, we calculated what the NQC megawatt is based on the MTR requirement. And so our collective obligation is 96.5 megawatts. And then if you apply the ELCC factors, looking at a 2024 COD versus a 2026 COD, you can see the difference there of about 20 megawatts in terms of the amount of capacity that we would have to procure to meet our obligation for the 7 CCAs. And so the other thing to note is, we sought to procure 500 megawatts. That was based again on not knowing exactly what the CPUC was going to require, how cost effective these projects were going to be or not be, and then who was actually going to participate from the CCA community in our effort. And so, we're now looking at somewhere closer to 100 megawatts or 123 megawatts is our procurement target. Next slide. And so that brings us to the long duration storage project number 1 that we identified to move forward. And this was through the evaluation process and through the negotiation process to date, which is still in process. It's not final. But the project that we're moving forward and included in this notice of intent to proceed is LS Power's Tumbleweed project. It is a 69 megawatt, 552 megawatt hour tolling agreement. So we get full capacity rights. We will be the scheduling coordinator, so we can decide when and how to dispatch it. It's located in Kern County. It is lithium ion. It has a partial capacity deliverability status. The project capacity is actually 115 megawatts, but we will only take 69 megawatts because that's what they have deliverability for. The COD for this project is per the offer is July 2024. So that puts us in that more higher ELCC, if we interpret it correctly. Again, it's an 8-hour battery. The contract has a fixed price, so no variable component, structured as $1 per kW month, and the term is 15 years. Next slide. So taking the MTR requirements for each of the CCAs that are participating and then converting that to a percentage, that's how we allocated the megawatts from this project to each CCA. So you can see here for Clean Power SF, they're 16% of that 96.5 megawatts, so they would get 11.1 megawatts. That's if everybody took their allocation or took their share, that would be what they would contract for. But because there's still uncertainty in the approval and execution stage of this process, we're leaving some contingency that if one big CCA or if we lose a certain amount of capacity because their board doesn't approve the project or for whatever reason, that we could all take a little bit more so that we can keep this project moving forward. So I'm thinking that each of us, when we seek board approval, will have that quantity listed in the request that they make to their board. The contracts, and I don't know if Kevin was going to mention this, but I don't know, just to be clear, the contract, the project participation share agreement has a step-up provision in it that each of us are willing to take 25% of our original obligations, whatever we contract for. In the case of Clean Power SF, if it's 11.1 megawatts, if one of us defaults after execution, they would take up to 25% of that 11.1 megawatt as under a step-up provision. And so this is essentially what each of us will be asking for, the 11.1 plus the contingency plus the 25% step-up. Next slide. And this gets us to the approval process. And I believe I am passing it over to Tony Braun at this point.
You are, Monica. Thank you very much. We're trying to give Monica a chance to get a little water, take a break. The I think many of you have seen this general outline before, but we wanted to go over here to complete the picture. Obviously, what we're asking today is not approval of the agreements that Kevin described, but to provide the notice to proceed with the consideration for approval in the December timeframe. So that's what we'll be looking for in step 2, is that the relevant agreements that Kevin has described would be brought back to the board for consideration and potential approval, the ones that CC Power is a party to, of course. And those, right now, we are tentatively looking at the 8th of December for that special meeting for this particular purpose. The board process approvals will commence in that timeframe. We have some, I think, fairly firm understanding of what the participating members' timeframes are as far as when they're going to the risk oversight committees and other internal structures, as well as potential timeframes for calendaring for formal approval as necessary. There's a little variation in that, and they still need to be firmed up, but they're generally in the November to early February timeframe, which is the contemplated timeframe that we have worked through to get these contracts fully effective. And then once all of the members have received their approvals, that is what triggers the effectiveness of the various tumbleweed specific agreements that we have described here today. So again, to recap, what we're asking for is a notice to proceed with this process, and then we will be working with your staffs to support your approval processes going forward, obviously commencing immediately, and we've already obviously been having those discussions with the Project Oversight Committee, but also with your general counsel's offices. And members would be likely commencing their own individual approval processes in the November timeframe, culminating in what we believe would be early February. Next slide, please. So Monica, I think, has got some substantive areas, as I think we are back to you as to summarize where we are.
Sure. So just a kind of high-level summary, Tumbleweed project, again, it's a high priority project for us, but we need to make it clear that the NPV to the participating CCAs is still highly uncertain, very much dependent on the regulatory structure for resource adequacy, market conditions, and a whole host of other things that are beyond our control. The procurement of this long duration storage is mandated through the midterm reliability requirement order. And we believe that Tumbleweed or LS Power's Tumbleweed project will meet that MTR order. Again, that's something that we can't say with certainty because it's also subject to the CPUC review and acceptance that this is in fact a project that meets the requirements. But from everything that we could see so far, we believe that it is a project that would meet that requirement. And it would meet about 56 to 68% of our requirement for those members that are participating in this effort. So it doesn't meet all the requirement, and we would still have a little bit more procurement to do. Again, because the COD for this project is at 2024, that helps us meet that requirement much easier if, again, we understand the application of the ELCCs to be based on COD when the project comes online. We have a meeting with the CPUC to seek clarification on this, and hopefully our understanding is correct. And then last, the project agreements and the energy storage service agreement, as we've all mentioned, is still in process of being negotiated. One of the things that we're still working on is the provisions for prevailing wage, which would include a PLA and a prohibition of forced labor consistent with the direction that we received from CC Power. And then I go to the next slide, I believe, to Tim.
Monica, Kevin, and Tony, thank you so much for providing this concise summary of a really complicated process that you really didn't have a roadmap in front of you in order to be able to lead to where we are right now. let me see, I don't know if you have in front of you the board resolution. What we're seeking is that you authorize that, or you provide a 60-day notice of intent to execute the energy storage agreement with the LS Power Tumbleweed and for long duration energy storage. Mr. Chair, before I turn it back to you and engagement with the other board members, what I'd like to do is go to the next slide that lists the project team that had shepherded this effort. What you'll see here is that each of your CCAs have been represented by your procurement managers. There are additional members who have staffed this resource. And I think that it's extremely important to acknowledge the awesome work that this team has done in order to be able to lead to this point in time. And so I would just myself like to thank them for the tireless work that they've put into this. But I think that there's another aspect to this that is important to reflect on, and that is that the state has grappled with problems with the grid reliability and other features of trying to decarbonize the grid. I'm new to the CCA community, and when I came in, when I considered accepting this appointment, I was skeptical that we could arrive at this point in time. I'm not alone in that. And I think I know in these 4 months that I've been here, you've proven me wrong. And I think that you're proving others wrong as well. As Monica has mentioned, there's a lot of work yet to be done in finalizing agreements, going through the review and approval process. And that also applies to LS Power. But I think that when I reflect on what is being accomplished here, what I'm struck by is you being able to bring in your local CCA's values and combine them in order to address a statewide problem. And that speaks legions, I think, of your ability to be able to help the state grapple large problems that we're all aware of, and the solutions have proven to be elusive. And I just think that it's important to tip my hat, not just to the team members who have been working on this for these last 12 months, but to the board members as well, because it's your support and your vision that I think have led us to this point. And so I just offer those thoughts because I think that they're important for us to keep in mind with the hard work that we have in front of us, but also the need to be able to acknowledge what it is that we have accomplished at this point. So with that, Mr. Chair, I turn this back over to you and to the board for the consideration of this resolution.
Thank you, Tim and the team. Just recognize this is probably the first substantive technical presentation we've made to the board. This is kind of what we had in mind when we all created CC Power to get into joint procurement, so it's pretty meaty. I will be handing it over to the board to ask for your comments before I go to public comment. So please do raise your hand so I can call on you. But before that, I just want to make recognize two other of our CCAs here. One is MCE. We had tremendous support from MCE with Bicken, Lindsay, and CB Hall contributing right from day one. And from 3CE, we had Dennis Boucher also being part of the project oversight committee and contributing quite a bit of sweat equity on this. So thanks to both this too. So I'm now going to go over to comments from our board, and I'll start off with Don Weiss, followed by Jeff.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to offer up a huge congratulations to the whole team that's been working on this. It's really exciting. It's a big milestone that we've all been working towards for more than a year. I think this idea has been in early stages for a couple of years, and it's so exciting to be getting to this point where it's coming to fruition. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is an incredibly difficult time in history to be doing energy procurement, particularly for this type of product. Long duration storage is really essential to help us absorb all of the variable renewable resources that are now on the grid. And I'm inspired by the values of the whole team in trying to integrate renewables with storage. But again, want to acknowledge how difficult it is. We have a lot of moving parts on the regulatory and compliance front, and that's making it very difficult for anyone to navigate the procurement of these resources to really integrate renewables. But to do it in a collaborative effort with like-minded agencies adds new challenges that have been really well overcome, I would say, by just seeing that we are at this point now. So I'm really excited that we've reached this milestone, and I just want to offer up huge congratulations and kudos to the whole team.
Thank you, Don. We'll have Jeff, followed by Mitch, Lori, and Jan. Jeff?
I'll start by noting, Chair Balachandran, your microphone is difficult, making you difficult to hear, in case you have an alternative. So I want to echo Don's thoughts and also really thank the POC members and the staff that supported them. This is a huge effort, I agree. They did things like try to figure out the value of long duration storage with all this regulatory uncertainty, and also over time as penetration of storage on the grid expands. And that is not just an exercise of difficult calculation, but it's inventing new methods of evaluating value for a product that we just don't have yet. And so I want to thank the team for figuring that kind of thing out. I also want to suggest the biggest value of this project has nothing to do with storage. The biggest value of this project is the proof of concept that small, new public power entities called CCAs can do joint procurement. That is by far, in my mind, the biggest value of this project, because it is a signal to the regulators, to the lawmakers, that we know what we're doing and we know how to get it done. So I just want to bring that to the table, and again, huge congrats. And also, frankly, to the staff of CC Power too. Thank you.
Mitch, Lori, Jan. Mitch?
Thanks, Krish. And again, echoing a lot of what Jeff and Don have already said, this is really a milestone for the CCA sort of structure. To see all the groups come together, all the programs come together, has been really impressive. And I would add my my appreciation to the Project Oversight Committee staff. A lot of really innovative work, as Jeff pointed out, went into this. What I would also emphasize, another point that Jeff just made, is that it's important for us to show proof of concept, but at a very practical level, representing one of the smaller CCAs, it's impractical for a program of our size, really, given the regulatory uncertainty, to go out there and really try to do this procurement on our own. And so one of the values of CC Power is displaying itself and allowing us to meet our regulatory requirements and really achieve some of the objectives that we have as an individual program. So thanks again to everybody who put in all the work, and looking forward to more projects coming forward as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Lori, followed by Jan.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to echo many of the comments that have already been made, but also really want to note that this is such an important milestone, and really congratulate the whole team. And just a reminder to all of us that, CC Power was only formed in February. And here we are in October, about to move forward with the first project. I think it really proves how quickly CCAs can respond to the market and how much we can do together. Only just over a year ago when we were even, kind of vetting the concept of this issue, and just really want to note how much has been accomplished in the last year in terms of issuing the RFO, doing all of the work to look at all of these bids and all the different technologies. And then importantly, taking all of the formation steps to form CC Power. It's quite historic, and just really want to commend, all of the staff and all of the teams that worked so hard on this effort, and just such an important milestone today.
Thank you, Lori. Jan?
And I'll ditto what everyone else has said and not repeat any of that. And thank very much the staff from all of the CCAs that worked on it. It was a lot of work, a lot of hours. And also thank you to the staff at CC Power and all of the other consultants who worked on it. This is what we formed the organization for, to do joint procurement amongst all of us. And we learned a lot about each other, about what's important to each of us, and and had the opportunity to build on each other's strengths, and also to spread the risk and the opportunity for doing this project together. So I want to thank the procurement committee, the staff, and also the stakeholders for your interest in this project and for your interest in this organization.
Thank you, Jan. Barb?
Thank you, Girish. Thank you. Mostly, I want to say, I agree with what everyone else is saying, right? This is a milestone moment for CC Power, a little toddler of a JPA, just a few months old, really. But I also want to recognize that we can't do this without the great work of all of our staffs. Tim had that slide up, which was nice to see, our staffs being recognized. Monica, I think you've really been our champion for all of us, and I just want to call you out in particular and say thank you for the work you have done in getting us this far. We still have some substantial, difficult work ahead. So while we're excited to be here, I think we also have to recognize there's still a lot of hard work to do. So let's keep it going. Let's keep it together. And let's keep this kind of public, transparent dialogue we're having about values and about interests and about these choices. Let's keep it going. This is just our first. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next up is Nick. Please unmute yourself.
Thanks. Great. Well, I just want to note that while East Bay Community Energy is not participating in this particular project, we have been sitting on the sidelines, cheering vigorously for all the work that's being done. And I'm really excited to see this project progress and to see this be the template for future joint action to meet state reliability goals. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Monica. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you for all those comments. So I'll now move to getting public comment and then bring it back to the board for discussion and action. So on the public side, I will start with Beth Vaughn. You're up.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Beth Vaughn, and I am the Executive Director of the California Community Choice Association. And I too want to congratulate all of you, the California Community Power Board, staff, and project team on this significant milestone, the first project to be brought to this board for consideration with the intention of seeking board approval later this year. It all begins with baby steps, and as Director Cyphers said, proof of concept. In this instance, a long duration storage project for 69 megawatts. It was only 4 years ago in 2017 that 8 community choice aggregators together served a total load of approximately 11,000 gigawatt hours and had executed power purchase agreements totaling about 800 megawatts. Today, 24 CCAs in aggregate serve a load of almost 60,000 gigawatt hours. That's about 30% of the CAISO balancing authority. And they have executed power purchase agreements for over 8,000 megawatts. To Director Mitchell's point, you've done a lot in a very short period of time. And to Director Wise's point, the possibility of standing up an agency for the purpose of joint power procurement has been a topic of discussion, I think, when I joined CalCCA back in 2017. But as the state's reliability challenges have come into sharper focus, the need for such an entity has taken on greater urgency. With this first step towards approval of the Tumbleweed Long Duration Storage Project, that vision is becoming a reality, paving the way for future projects that will ensure progress toward our state climate and clean energy goals. Again, on behalf of your colleagues at CalCCA, I congratulate CC Power for reaching this important milestone. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. We'll now move to Heidi Harmon, followed by Rafael Lai.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for all of your great work. This is an exciting day. And I wanted to say thank you in particular for your commitment to a project labor agreement. As the recent mayor of San Luis Obispo, I'm proud to have brought the first project labor agreement and community workforce agreement in the history of San Luis Obispo County. And we know that prioritizing working people is not only the right thing to do in and of itself, but it is critical to growing momentum on transitioning to a clean economy. I've recently left my role as mayor, where I was also on the 3CE board, and stepped up to work with Let's Green California. And like so many others, we urge you to continue with worker-centric policies. As one of the emerging most significant state agencies, you have an opportunity and a responsibility to make sure that these worker-first policies remain a critical part of your long-term strategy. So thank you again for your commitment to keeping the community in community power by committing to jobs where folks can make a living wage and where they can take care of themselves, their families, and their communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rafael Lai, followed by Alex Landsberg.
Hello, and Rafael Lai, Executive Director of Critical Impact Consulting. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and thank you, Monica, for that wonderful presentation. This was incredible to see, and as somebody who has seen CCAs and concepts, brought it out to the public and bring it out to where it is and see where it is now, it is incredible. I will also comment and say, though, that there is an insufficient lack of environmental justice language and policy that was presented. And I think that there's a lot more that needs to be put into effort into engaging environmental justice stakeholders. As I mentioned before, there seems to be a lack or no meaningful engagement of environmental justice stakeholders. There doesn't seem to be a definition of environmental justice communities. Cal EnviroScreen is missing from the analysis. I think if the project is in Kern County, it has environmental justice communities there. And so I think that going forward, I would really urge this agency that in this incredible moment that we are in, and not just leading California, but really leading our reality of energy democracy and decarbonizing, that we don't forget environmental justice communities, that we don't forget communities that have suffered and been impacted by carbon pollution, and don't forget that these communities are part of our larger community and part of our potential ratepayers and everything else like that. So I really encourage this agency to put in more effort on the environmental justice front and engaging environmental justice stakeholders. But looking forward to that. And other than that, great job.
Thank you. Alex Landsberg, followed by Angelo Farouk.
Thank you very much, Girish. Thank you very much, board members. Alex Landsberg, Research and Advocacy Director with the San Francisco Electrical Construction Industry. Tom Enslow, who all of us have been working with over the past several months, could not join, and I've been asked to just sort of relay his comments as well. I think it's incredible to see this project moving forward, and I think we heard a couple of folks here use the term proof of concept, and I think it's a good proof of concept for what CCAs can do together when they coordinate and build economies of scale and buying power for their projects. But it's also a proof of concept that incorporating labor and environmental policies early on in the RFP process works. It demonstrates that you can get good projects, that workforce development policies and these other concerns are not a barrier to achieving our clean energy goals, and ultimately they do get you a project at the end of the day. I think the other point I think to remember is that there's still more to go. I think I want to make sure not to neglect the fact that the policies adopted for the LDS project are a first step, and we're very much looking forward to working with the members of this board and as well as really the ad hoc committee and Executive Director Haynes and crafting and finalizing these things for the next meeting. So with that, I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's exciting to see this proceed, and we look forward to tightening these things up down the line. Thanks.
Next, Angelo Farouk, followed by Slow Climate Action.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Angelo Farouk, and I'm the chairman of the California Workforce Development Board. I want to first begin by just acknowledging it's great to see Girish continuing his great leadership from his time in Riverside, where I'm based in. But I also just want to express my appreciation for all the great work that all of you are doing on this LDS policy. As one of the largest players in California's energy landscape, this new agency, it's important to continue aligning with the state's efforts on high road jobs, and especially in the important clean energy sector. So I think it's important to not only advance those state goals for our green economy, but also to ensure the quality, reliability, and the stability for the projects in JPA. And I just want to add also that the local hiring components involving project labor agreement and how it complements some of the apprenticeships and career pathways that our state workforce board is investing in are all play an important role in making an impact. So again, thank you for all of your guys' efforts, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Next would be Slow Climate Action.
Good morning. My name is Eric Vium, speaking on behalf of the Slow Climate Coalition and climate organizations across the Central Coast. I've spent the last 15 years supporting the expansion and success of community choice energy in California, and just want to start by saying how proud I am of everything that has been accomplished by our community choice energy programs across the state. And I want to particularly want to thank you as our executive leaders for the work that you've done in having us be successful. And I just want to congratulate you for succeeding in launching this joint procurement agency and taking on doing hard things and succeeding in doing those hard things. I truly believe that this organization will do a majority of procurement for future energy and storage as we move towards a carbon-free grid. And so we, as an agency, a joint agency, are going to be extremely influential and have the potential to be extremely impactful. And as part of that, I think it's critical that we have strong and unambiguous policies and standards that support labor, the environment, environmental justice, and public engagement and oversight. I really think it's important for our ongoing success and support that we get this part of it right, and that in all future procurement and in the policies that support that procurement, that labor, environmental justice, and public engagement and oversight are clearly defined, so and that those preferences are communicated early in the procurement process so that all those that are responding to the request for offers do so in a way that levels the playing field and maintains those high standards across all potential procurement opportunities. So again, thank you very much and congratulations on your success and for our ongoing success together.
Next, Rick Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am Rick Bonilla. I'm a member of the Board of Peninsula Clean Energy. I'm the Deputy Mayor of the City of San Mateo. I want to thank you all for your participation. I want to add on to all the congratulations and comments that have been made, but also especially the comments of Alex Landsberg, where he spoke about the alignment of the proof of concept thought. I want to say further that I was really happy to see, after much long work, much commitment from all parties involved, many professionals working very hard to make all of this stuff happen. It's like inventing the wheel here. But the RFO objectives and requirements slide that was put up earlier is something that, as a member of the Board of PCE, I've been looking forward to, and I'm really happy to see that this is the way we're going to be guiding this project. As a retired union carpenter and still a very close friend of labor, I really appreciate the fact that right now, what I'm hearing is that this project is projected to be performed under a PLA. I thought I heard some comment from Monica regarding that some parts of that are still being negotiated. Causes me a little concern, but still, as long as the general idea is that we end up with a PLA, then in general, that should be really good. So that said, I want to thank everybody once again, and I say goodbye. Thanks, bye.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the directors to see if there's discussion and be happy to entertain a motion at the appropriate time to approve Resolution 21-10-02. So let me see, we have Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, Garish. Monica, I just wanted to ask a quick question around the regulatory discussion that's going on right now. Obviously, that's a big uncertainty. We're facing it at the individual CCA level as well as here at CC Power. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit about what the conversation is that's going on with CPUC to try to define that?
A couple of things. One, on the ELCC, or the effective load carrying capacity factor, the CPUC released a table or a study in September that gave an indication of what those ELCCs were going to be. From the very get-go, when they released the midterm reliability order, they told us that nameplate capacity for storage was going to be derated by these ELCC factors. They had talked about setting marginal ELCC factors for storage. And so we didn't know if that was going to apply to long duration storage, since there's not much long duration storage on the grid right now. We assumed that there would not be an ELCC applied. But the study that they conducted showed that over time, more and more LDS is expected to come on the grid. And therefore, the more long duration storage or any storage that you have on the grid, the less effective it becomes, and therefore the less likely that it can meet the reliability requirements over time. So our discussion with the CPUC is not to challenge the study. I think that they had their consultants or their team conduct the study and have determined that ELCCs need to apply to long duration storage. That's not our objective. Our objective is clearly to understand how to apply the table. If a project comes on with a COD of 2024, does that mean that we get to account 94% or whatever it is of the nameplate capacity towards our compliance requirement? And because they're not going to finalize this until December 2022, we have a little bit of uncertainty there. Like, obviously, if we just do the tumbleweed, it's not a problem on account of we have plenty of headroom towards our compliance requirements, since it's only 69 megawatts and we need more than that. But it's the next project and the project after that that we want to understand. We don't want to over procure. And if we do end up over procuring for whatever reason, we also want to get some kind of indication of whether there'll be a grandfathering mechanism of over procurement in any future procurement orders for long duration storage. So it's really a discussion just to kind of understand what they're thinking. It's not an ex parte meeting, we're just meeting with some staff folks.
Great, thank you very much. That's helpful.
Next question, comment, Lori.
Yeah, I don't have a question or a comment, but I will motion to approve enthusiastically. And thanks again for all of the hard work.
I'll second it.
All right, great. We have 3 CE seconding and San Jose making the motion. Any further discussion from the board? If not, I'll call for a vote.
Well, my screen, Brittany dropped off my screen. Central Coast Community Energy.
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco.
Yes.
East Bay Community Energy.
Yes.
Marin Clean Energy.
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy.
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority.
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy.
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power.
Heck yeah.
And Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
The resolution is unanimously approved, board members.
Phenomenal. Thank you all so much. A special thanks to Monica from SVCE and the entire team. This is great. And yeah, so thank you all. We have more coming. We will have a board meeting in October 20th. So we're going to keep our foot to the pedal to continue working on this project and others. So with that, I am adjourning today's meeting. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.